welcome to another Poison Pen podcast. My name is Patrick, and I am the science fiction fantasy selector here at the Pen, currently at the house because I am fighting a cold. I don't want to infect the rest of the staff, so I'm trying to be responsible. And I am really lucky because I get to interview one of my favorite science fiction fantasy writers, mystery thriller, the kitchen sink, essentially. Daniel O'Malley. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. This is really exciting. So unfortunately, I read your book digitally, so I don't have a physical copy of the book Blitz.
Unfortunately, I read your book. I'm like, wow.
No, I just don't have a physical one to show on screen. But this is a fantastic book. It just came out 2 weeks ago here in the States and published by Little Brown. And it is a fantastic historical thriller, mystery, science fiction meets the X-Men sort of novel. It's really hard to explain. People ask the Check-A series, what's it like? And I usually say the X-Files meets X-Men meets, a great thriller FBI mystery. I mean, they're awesome.
It kind of straddles I straddle the genres, which is the least dignified phrase ever. But so when I'm here in Canberra, which is a government city, people are like, "Oh, you write books. What do you do?" I'm like, "It's a supernatural thriller set in the public service." And because everyone here works for the government, they're all like, "Oh, really? That sounds, very interesting." You can see the ears perk up. But yeah, thank you so much. That's really kind of you to say.
Absolutely. Now, it's really cool because the Check-A series has been turned into a television series. It was aired on Showtime not too long ago. I think they did kind of a mini series with it. And in this new book that you've published, it takes place both in the present and the past. Can you give us a little bit of information on Blitz?
Sure. So the series, as I mentioned, supernatural thrillers set in the civil service. This is the secret British government department that deals with and is partially staffed by the supernatural. And in this book, in Blitz, which is kind of a standalone, the first two sort of sit together quite tastily, but this one you can read without having read the first two. Partially, it takes place during the Blitz in London when the bombing attacks are happening from Nazi Germany, and then partially takes place modern day. In Blitz, in the Blitzy part, in the first part, three women are standing in the sky above London watching the bombers come, and they are forbidden from interfering, but one of them snaps and takes down a plane with her bare hands, and they sort of agree, well, we won't tell anybody, but what the hell. And then they discover that something has survived, something has escaped, so they must hunt this down through the war-torn streets of London in secret from their own organization. And then the modern day part deals with a woman, Lynette Binns, whose name I got from a charity auction. Somebody bid to name a character. And normally with that sort of thing, it's very much, name on a tombstone or, the way who gets killed. But this name fit really well. So I was like, yeah, she's the main heroine. And she is a mother and a working librarian and married. And then one day lightning erupts from her body and she is drafted into the Check-A and sent to magical boarding school and then goes off to work. And one day she finds evidence that somebody, and it looks like it must have been her, has been committing murders in the British criminal underworld. And so she immediately goes on the run from her colleagues to figure out what's actually going on. So it's very, very simple, that old time-worn story, basically,
Exactly. I mean, you do throw, in not a bad way, the kitchen sink with the number of genres that you cross. But what I really love about that is that you've made a really entertaining book. But on top of that, we learn a heck of a lot about the Blitz as well in World War II. And that was one of my favorite things about it, is the fact that you teach us an awful lot about what's going on and what Britain went through. And that was a fascinating part about the book. What was your inspiration to combine the past and the present, and then specifically the Blitz?
Okay, wow. All right. Well, the past and the present, I'd read a couple of books that I really loved that did that. Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon, for instance. I don't know if you've read it.
Huge
You
fan.
probably
Huge
you
fan.
probably should have. I mean,
Yeah, I've read just about everything that he's written, and he's
yeah, okay.
phenomenal. But he's not a quick read. You have to
No,
be willing to kind of tuck in to his.
absolutely. I mean, I've read all his stuff multiple times, and each time I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even, did he know he was doing that? But I really loved that book. So Cryptonomicon deals with partially set in World War II, partially, I guess it's the late 90s, since that's when it came out, early 2000s, but it follows two families, the two families' experiences during the Blitz or Blitz, World War II, and now. And that really, really struck a chord with me. And then, and Connie Willis, who's written time travel books, which we were just talking about beforehand. She
Right.
wrote she wrote a couple of her time travel books set in World War II and in the Blitz, which I loved. But also growing up in Australia, I think I was at the time when a lot of children's books were coming from the UK. It seemed like all the children's books came from the UK. And a lot of them dealt with World War II, either because the author had been an adult in World War II or the author had been a kid in World War II. So like Diana Wynne Jones, who wrote, Howl's Moving Castle and whatnot, she had been a child evacuee, and that had fed into her books. And the first book of hers that I read was Tale of Time City, which is, I don't know if you've ever read it. It's a kid's book. It's
I
great.
haven't. I just recently read Howl's Moving Castle, probably a year or so ago,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it was fantastic. It really was one
It-
of those books that you go back through and read as an adult, and you pick
yeah.
up an awful lot that I don't think you'd pick up as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Her books are so good. But try A Tale of Time City, and it deals with this girl who's being evacuated out of London and then is abruptly abducted into a science fiction story by two children from the Time City, which is a city outside of time. But it was that evacuation thing. There were so many books that I read that had World War II as a child as the background. Robert Westphal wrote some children's books, Blitz Cat, I think The Promise. There's a classic Goodnight, Mr. Tom by Michelle Megorian, which is about a boy who was evacuated. It's a beautiful story. And just a whole bunch of these. And they sort of seeped into my mind. Even Enid Blyton, some of her books have, I don't know if you're familiar with Enid Blyton, classic English children's novels, massively successful during her time. She wrote The Famous Five, a
I
variety
am
of
not,
things.
unfortunately. It sounds like I should be.
Oh man. Well, I've thrown some hat tip references to her work into Blitz. But anyway, so in the background, my mind was always, yeah, this is an important and exciting and an interesting and a weird time and good to explore. And also, I had written the first two books, and one of the established rules that I'd sort of established was, if you're going to have this army of people with supernatural abilities, why aren't they ruling the world? And, well, they work for the government and they're forbidden from interfering. And I had sort of thought, yeah, you don't interfere, you don't take down the mugger or whatever, fine. But if your city is at war, if your country is at war, and you know that there are atrocities being committed, how can you actually stand by? Can you allow yourself to do that? And that was one of the things, a sort of a little thought experiment that I was just had while I was waiting in line in a Subway sandwich shop. And I was like, wait a minute, this will happen. If you do, oh my God, yes, okay, I'll get that sub and a napkin and a pen. And it was just, by the time I actually got the sandwich, I had the bones for it sort of laid down.
I really love it because you have really four strong female characters in this. You've got, in the present, you've got Lynn, and then you've got Pamela, Usha, and Bridget, who are the three kind of main characters throughout the past.
Yeah.
And Pam is the one, no spoilers within the first few pages.
You're fine.
She's the one who ends up snapping, and what really is so striking about it is it seems very out of character for her. She is probably the one that is the greatest rule follower, the most.
Yeah, she's the the classic soldier, the good, very effective golden child. Yeah.
Exactly. And she just snaps, and she, the interesting part about that is it really leads her down this mystery. If she hadn't acted and done this one act, it wouldn't lead us to what we get to with Lynette. And I don't want to spoil too much because there's a lot going on, but it sort of opens up. Her actions are what send ripples through the present.
Yeah, and I was always very interested in the the way that, I mean, it's trite to say, but the actions of people in the past really do affect our lives today. I mean, every we are only here because of decisions made by those who came before us, you and I, or I mean, I think Bill Bryson said, the odds of you actually existing are very slim. Everybody in your ancestry had to live, had to, reproduce and reproduce at the right time to produce the person that's you, kind of thing. And that's just the most basic of it. But, so many things about our lives are, the decisions that we make will influence people in the future. It's a very eerie thought.
Exactly. Now, what made you decide that you were going to have most of your main characters throughout your book, whether it was Mafani and the Rook and in Stiletto, or your characters within the Blitz to be superpowered individuals? What made you
Yeah,
decide that that was going to be the direction that you were going to take within the Check A?
okay, the Rook started. I really had no idea what was going to happen. For those of you who haven't read it, shame on you. But also, it's available at all good bookstores, including, especially at the Poison Pen. Um, the Rook is the first book in the series, and that opens with this woman waking up in the park, and she's surrounded by dead bodies, and she's lost her memories. And in her pocket, she finds a letter saying, "Dear you, the body you are wearing is mine. I knew this would happen." And I really had no idea what was going to happen beyond that. In fact, I started writing the letter. I've always loved amnesia stories. The Born Identity, The Long Kiss Goodnight. There was a not British, Australian, Jesus, Australian. Not every author was British. An Australian children's writer, Victor Kelleher, who wrote a book called Master of the Grove, which is the first amnesia book I ever encountered, and it knocked me out. But I've always liked amnesia stuff, and I like the idea of, if you had amnesia, you having instructions and sort of guiding you. But that really led down all these questions. They opened these questions. Having written this letter, I had to answer them. I'm like, okay, well, how did you know you were going to lose your memories? Clearly, you have to have some knowledge of the future. Okay, so there's going to be either science fiction or powers, that kind of thing. And it just sort of kept opening up more things. If there are multiple people who could have stolen your memories, means there's multiple different people with powers. What do these people do all day? Why are they not ruling the world? Who pays for their therapy? Because they'd obviously need it, that kind of thing. And so, and I've always been a big comic book fan, huge comic book person, always loved individual weird powers. And I thought, okay, you know what? I want to write it like this. And then, of course, they're going to work for the British government. Why wouldn't they? Yeah. So each from then on, it's always been a case like that. Everybody has their own specific power.
Well, and it sort of makes sense. I mean, because we're all individual, we're all unique. You know, um, there could be certain similarities depending on phenotypes and genotypes, but really,
Yeah.
you've got to, and it makes it more interesting, obviously. But one of the cool things that I really liked with the Rook and what you've done with Blitz is you straddle these characters that really are pretty moral, but they have the option of going down a path that they shouldn't, rebelling, but it leads them down with a real uh, chance for character growth within their entire character arc. And I think that that would be really challenging because Mafani is not the same person at the beginning of Rook that she is at the end of Stiletto, for instance.
Yeah.
And certainly your characters grow and change. So, I mean, series books often will have characters that are a little bit more flat. Yours tend to be a little bit more rounded. Um, A, what's the challenge with that? And B, how do you make sure that that character growth happens?
It's not always easy, especially because with so many of the superhero traits and tropes, you're kind of like, well, they have their power, they're defined by this. How are they gonna, it's such an easy and convenient thing to slot them into and say, this is the person who does this, and therefore it's taken care of. I guess it's really showing how they react to their experiences, and their sorrows and their triumphs and so on, and also how they regard themselves, and how they think about themselves as much as they think about the world or their perspectives. There's always ones where you can say, well, they've changed because they've climbed to a higher position or they've vanquished the demon, but it's as much how they feel about that, what they think about it. I think that's how it makes them real for me anyway, is doing that. and also giving them significant moments of lack of dignity, which is crucial to my personal experience. I'm constantly doing ridiculous things.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we get the most growth when we make fools of ourselves, right?
God, I hope so. Otherwise, there really is no hope for me.
So it's interesting. So you are a very deliberate writer, and it's telling within your books because of the amount of character growth, the amount of information you give us, um, and Blitz is not a small book by any stretch of the imagination. It's 700 pages.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm going to caveat this. This is a great book. So 700 pages does not feel like 700 pages. I wanted more. By the time I was done, I wanted more. And that's a good sign for a really long book. This also took you a while. This took you 6 years,
Yeah, this was a
right?
substantial, yeah, tome. Especially because for much of the time I still had a day job. I was working still with the Australian Public Service, and so a lot of it was written during the evenings or the weekends. Occasionally, I'd take some vacation time to write. I didn't actually get to go anywhere. So that always slows things down. I'm trying my hand at the full time novelisting now, and it's amazing how much more you get written when that's what you're doing, as opposed to sort of motivating yourself after dinner. You're like, okay, I've got to do this before I can watch anything interesting, that kind of thing.
Right,
Um,
exactly. Kind
but
of
it is a big book. It's longer than I had anticipated, but it was really, and I think as much of that was from the decision to have two storylines, and I wanted to make sure that each one, had a full story. And by the end, I was like, I really have written two books here. This was not the wisest of decisions on my part.
But it works really well together. I mean, you intersperse, you go back and forth between the past and the present. Every time that I finished a chapter in the past, I wanted to continue on with the past. And then you brought us into the present. And by the time we were done with the present, I wanted more present. So,
Okay,
I mean,
excellent.
that
Good.
keeps you reading. It's a good cadence to it. What's
Sure.
the challenge of bridging and keeping the reader hooked by switching time frames? Because that's a real challenge to do.
Yeah, and I tried not always to just have everything ending on a cliffhanger, which is a good way to do it. But at the same time, everybody needs a bit of a break occasionally. And I generally have my stories, they'll have a certain amount of flow. It'll be like, just from my own innate, I'll be like, no, it's time somebody's ass was kicked. There's been a lot of discussion. It's time for a good fight scene or a good revelation. And this is the first book I've written that has a sex scene in it, which is, it's quite a vanilla sex scene. It's not anything outrageous. But in the back of my mind was the knowledge that my mom is always my first reader. And I was just like, this is going to be really bad. This will be traumatizing for everybody. But it wasn't. She kindly never mentioned it, which is enabled us to continue to have a relationship. But honestly, so when I have that flow of, okay, it's time for a fight scene here, I'm like, but I have just had one in World War II. It was hard. It was harder in that regard. And at various points, it was a case of having a post-it for each chapter and saying, okay, putting in an exclamation point for, there's conflict here, therefore I don't want to flank it with conflict elsewhere. This is a very discussion heavy one. This is a very emotion. You don't want to have just like emotion followed by emotion. It's too intense. It gets a little graty. So in some ways it was quite clinical, actually. Things got moved around, and my editor, who's very, very good, would at a couple points say, you might want to move this up. We can't have a long explanation right here, right at the point of the crescendo. And I'd be like, how dare you? This is my, this was very deliberate. I mean, you're right, but really, how dare you? And the problem is inevitably she's correct. It's so vexing. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll move it. Well, now it works, but I'm not happy about that fact.
Exactly. We're done with this conversation. You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Yes, you're correct.
The biggest challenge too is, it does take a good editor to kind of help you piece together those plot points to kind of help move things along. And I always say that, especially with books as complex like that, a good editor is necessary, because they're going to point out those flaws, not or areas where you can make it a little bit better, make it pop a little bit more.
Yeah. Or I mean, one is when you've got your head in this book this whole time and you're writing it and you're writing it, and then eventually, she's like, you should probably tell them that this person's a vampire. And I'm like, did I not do that? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll put that in. But I knew, therefore, doesn't need to be.
I don't know how many times I've sent something to Barbara, and she, our store owner, and she's sent it back kind of reworded just a little bit, and I'm like, I sound like a genius, thank you.
Yeah.
It was all her.
So they're like, and they're so tactful about it too.
Exactly, but she was Solari's American editor for years. Solari Gentile, a friend of yours, and she was just our writer in residence here at the Poison
So
Pen.
jealous.
I know.
He says pointedly. No.
And it's interesting because I think in the United States we're getting more and more introduced to Australian writers and to I'm going to put in air quotes foreign writers. I mean, it's nice because I think that Jacques Sarong, another Australian writer, did really well and came to the store, and we've had kind of a flow of Australian writers sort of making it to the shop. Do you feel like Australia is becoming more and more of a prominent place for writers to be introduced to the United States and Britain?
I guess. I mean, I was quite clinical in my approach, very uncharacteristically strategic insofar as I first went towards an American publisher, because American agent and an American publishers, because I knew it was a bigger market, at least for my kind of fiction. But I know that, Australian authors are continuing, they're continuing to emerge and stuff. And I think we're getting a very good culture here of seeing that, of seeing new, fresh writers. So hopefully it all continues to sort of spread out. And also I love seeing new unexpected works from different countries and being like, oh, okay, I didn't know they had a sci-fi or a fantasy presence in these other countries, but it's great to see and brings, brand new perspectives, which I think is fantastic. So hopefully.
Exactly. Now people are going to say, Daniel, you don't sound Australian.
I know. So my parents are American. My mom's from Kalamazoo, Michigan. My dad's from Philadelphia. I was, born and spawned here, but always had something of the accent. And then, actually quite a strong American accent. Got some mild teasing. And then when I moved to the States, it got completely solidified. There was never any question. So I went there for university and for grad school, and came back, but always had the American accent. No idea. I have Australian vocabulary, that helps.
Exactly.
I'm not going to use any of it, but
So, and it is kind of funny because, it's something that people don't expect to hear, but at the same time, you've chosen characters that are Australian or British. I mean, those are kind of your strengths in terms of building out their voices. And one of the things that I really liked within the Blitz was that, all of your characters did sound incredibly British in terms of their tone and in their voice. There wasn't that sort of, you can tell when people are trying to do accents or to do that. I mean, it sort of reads very British. So in terms of creating voice, how are you making sure that your words are deliberate with, like, for instance, Lynette Lynette's kind of a working woman. She's a little bit more common, less, she can be, because her husband's a cop, she can be a little bit more in your face, which is a surprise as a librarian. So I'm really curious how you developed that voice that's so clear.
Gosh, I don't know. Lynette took some research, startlingly. Her part of her backstory is that she, I was given a certain amount of freedom because she is established as having been a foster child and then adopted. So we know little about her early life, but that she has come from difficult circumstances. Even she doesn't really remember, but there's that is sort of part of her existence and her experience. And then she is fostered by these good people who take her in and look after her. And then she is a librarian, and then she's married to a small, not small town, a city cop, but not a big city cop. So I really felt that she could have, I could do a lot of different things with her and always be sort of be able to explain it and say, well, this comes from this. You know, if there were any jarring elements, nobody is really one complete, you know, easily defined, oh yes, that's a novelist voice, yes, that's a public servant voice. There's always 10 billion different things that come in. So it was kind of in that regard, you know, that was a thing, was that she's multiple experiences, multiple people. And you can see it at one point when she is, you know, she's a professional public servant now in the supernatural agency, you know, with her library experience, but she's confronted by something and has this almost atavistic, you know, childhood trauma that, you know, prompts her to act. She's complicated in that regard, which I thought was important to establish, and it helps justify her actions or explain her actions, which might seem at first glance a little out of character, but then you can say, okay, it's because of this, it draws on this, and also her cynicism as, you know, the wife of a policeman who's seen things and heard about things and knows how things works, and has a suspicion, even though she's in the government, of authority in a lot of ways. So that was a thing, was talking to friends who are cops, friends who have fostered children, friends who are librarians, and then people from the area that she, you know, her life is set in. Sometimes just a case of watching YouTube videos, sometimes it's a case of, you know, doing research about the area, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a librarian, I always, by education and for 17 years of work,
Yeah.
I always gravitate to the librarian character. I always like that. I always like the fact that, you know, and you got her right. I mean, one of the things, some of the smartest, most tenacious people I know are librarians.
Absolutely. And
And
it sounds true, and I've said it before, but it was in some ways that was a convenient shorthand for, okay, this is somebody who's going to be extremely competent, you know, has put up with a lot of crap just by dealing with the public, you
yes,
know, but is able to maintain a straight face in a lot of ways. Yeah.
if you ever want good stories, I always say talk to the librarian after work, because
Oh,
you can't say it in the building as a public servant, but you know,
right.
at parties and stuff like that, you can get some crazy stuff going on of what happens in public buildings. And
Absolutely.
you know, I'm not sure. Australia does have had a great show called The Librarians, and
No.
made its way over to the US for a while. You could stream it on Hulu, and I think you can buy it on Amazon Prime. But it is it's a very candid, and they must have done their research on libraries, because they were pretty darn accurate in some of the
Gosh,
goings ons, and
I can well imagine.
it was a very office like comedy, situational comedy.
Excellent. I do most of my writing now at the National Library. I go there each day. If I stay at home, I'm not going to get much done. You know, there's too many distractions. But and I have friends who are, you know, work in the library, both as librarians and also some who are with security and stuff. But also, you see the same. There's several people who are there apart from me every day. Like, okay, that person's working on the PhD. If you know what people's different things are, and then some you're like, what is that person's deal? You know, there's like the guy who's typing loudly all the time, really, and you're just like, okay, I assume, you know, an angry manifesto of some sort, you know, but he's there every day. Uh, you know,
Exactly, or
there's the regulars.
using the public computers.
Mhm.
And so Lynette, I really gravitated to. I thought she was a phenomenal character. Um, and speaking of which, you said just recently, you before we went on, that you went from being, you know, doing the uh, full time work, part time writing. Now you're a full time writer.
Yeah.
How what prompted you to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing full time now?
It was a confluence of multiple factors, not least of which was, I think I can do this, you know. And I had really enjoyed my government work for a long time. I worked with really terrific people. I worked with the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, and that's like the Australian, is it not NCI, NTSB. these are the people who investigate plane accidents and train accidents and marine accidents. So they're very atypical. You think of a public servant going to their office each day and just sort of doing their public service stuff, but these were the people who would come into the office, do their work, and then get the call and abruptly have to go out into the middle of the wilderness, rappel out of helicopters down to accidents and investigate them. So, at the end of the day, you're sort of like, man, I had a day. I was working all this paperwork. And like, yeah, I had a day. I had to, wade through a swamp. Somebody had a shotgun in case of pigs, and we had to find this helicopter crash. And you're like, yeah, well, I had a lot of paperwork, So I really liked working with these people, and they were so brilliant. And in many ways, no specific individuals inspired me. I always like to say that, but the idea of these extreme public servants was always really cool. And then, the opportunity arose to try my hand at being the full-time novelist. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to see if I can swing it. So it's been 2 years now, just about, and it's been productive. And I miss the people, though. I miss those specific people, but B, I miss having people to bother throughout the day. The librarians, you can only come up to them so much and say, so what's shaking? And they're gonna be like, I'm trying to work. I do have to help these people.
Exactly.
Secure. So I miss that. The isolation sometimes is hard. We'll see how long that goes before I crack.
I've been working, I have a day job. I work IT. This is actually my little office area that I sit and program. And then afterwards, I crave people, and I go to the bookstore and I work there. So, because you've got to have a little bit
Balance is important, man.
Exactly. And, the thing is that I love books. I love talking to people about books, and, programming I'm good at, but books are my passion. So I've got to throw a little bit of that in. And it's always so exciting to hear when writers talk about, hey, I went full time, because you're really following your passion of being a writer. You need to write to fulfill part of that, your soul.
It's completely true. I'm happier in so many ways. I miss a lot of things, but I really do enjoy it, and it feeds on itself. When you're contemplating something nearly constantly, new patterns, new ideas present themselves much more easily. You're submerged in it, and then when it happens, you're like, oh my god, mental. I've had a revelation. This is fantastic. This person's the murderer. It never even occurred to me.
Exactly. Now, so part of the challenge now is, now you're kind of touring. You're doing your, this is a virtual tour for you, so you're not going as many places, but I'm sure you're still traveling around Australia to talk about Blitz, which is probably it's been a year and a half since you actually finished writing and doing all the edits and gone to print.
Yeah, this was a little tighter. It happened. I think we finished it earlier this year.
Okay.
I think, honestly, that's the problem with being the full-time writers. Yeah, it happened at some point. What day of the week is it? So yeah, it's been a chance to revisit it in a lot of ways, actually, as well. Like you said, and be like, question. I'm like, I don't actually know let me check. Oh yeah, this.
And people wonder, well, why don't you talk more about the latest novel? And part of it is because hopefully what we're doing is we're getting you interested in reading it, and we don't want to spoil it for you, because this book especially, there's so much that happens throughout it, and there's such a great growth with your characters. But in terms of, if we talk too much about the mystery, I might spoil it. I don't want to spoil it.
No, I appreciate it.
But such a killer read. So when I was reading through this, I was getting feelings of like Graham Greene, Stephen King, a little bit of that Preston and Child sort of, because they also happen to do the mystery thriller with the tinge of the supernatural.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm wondering if these authors are some that you've grown to admire over the years, or.
Oh, Stephen King, astounding writer. And my favorites of his are always the ones that are, I guess, more psychic based. I really like The Dead Zone. I love, Firestarter, those ones. He's got such an amazing voice and writes such a good variety of things. Graham Greene, I haven't read in eons, not since high school, but I guess it's in there. It's in the DNA. The writers I've you know, I always think first of George MacDonald Fraser. He wrote the Flashman books. Did you ever
Oh,
read those?
yes. Those are phenomenal.
They
Exactly.
are. They are. I mean, very much of their time, and cleverly written to show a different time as well. But also, he does such a good job of making historical places feel real and people feel real, like normal people, like real people. You know, he doesn't regard them with a certain too much awe, which I always thought was really great, and also showing that they can be quite unpleasant as well. I read a lot of historical fiction, so I've just been going through C.J. Sansom's books. Have you read his?
Those are phenomenal. Matthew Shardlake,
Oh,
Tudor era. He's a hunchback lawyer,
yeah.
and I absolutely love those. If the audience has never read them, they're really worth reading.
They're great. And I mean, he every 5 pages, he sort of reminds you how much everything stinks and how filthy everyone is, which like, yeah, it's important to keep that in mind, but it's the details of the day-to-day life. I mean, I did a lot of research for this. And one of my favorite books for the research, which I recommend to everybody, is Norman Longmate's book, How We Lived Then, which is all anecdotes. He put out ads in the paper saying, I want to hear your stories about day-to-day life during World War II. You know, it's not the soldiers, it's not the battles, it's people, schoolboys, it's people who run like fish and chips shops. It's, you know, everybody's experiences. And the little details in that are really what sold it for me. And it was a great effort not to just do everything that, you know, my editor was kind of like, we don't need every element. You know, it's not just a case of showing off your research. And I'm like, fine. But small things, you know, how women did makeup when they couldn't get cosmetics. You know, they're like, oh yeah, beetroot juice on the lips, seal it in with Vaseline, you know, draw a line down the back of your legs. It looks like you're wearing stockings, that kind of thing. And the experiences of, you know, the food shortages, rationing, you know, kids growing up and never having any sugar, never having, weeping when they see a banana and are confronted with it. You know, what do you do with this? That kind of thing was very good, but also the day, making it seem very day-to-day life. You know, I've mentioned previously these kids who are told, okay, you can either finish your exam or you can go to the bomb shelter because the attack is happening. And they're like, well, I guess we better do the exam. You know, these are the finals. You got to take care of that. And a lot of that research was happening during the COVID lockdowns, and sort of put a lot of things in perspective. You know, people are like, how will we cope? And I'm like, it's terrible, it's dreadful, but you know, here's a different perspective on people not too far removed from our own experiences in terms of life.
It's such a, you know, I think that, you know, the pandemic was terrible, but you're right. My dad grew up, you know, just post World War II.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the, and I had family that used to talk about the Great Depression, and then, you know, here having to ration during World War II and getting the, you know, they had booklets where they could go and get a certain amount of meat each month, and you know, you're only allotted that. So quite a bit of that. And there is a really great World War II um, nonfiction book called The Candy Bombers that talked about
Oh.
some of the American soldiers who would actually rain down candy on the, you know, they would deliver
Oh
candy.
yeah, and like Berlin and stuff as well. Uncle
Exactly.
Wiggly Wings, he was the guy. He would fly the plane and do that. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Really,
Uh,
you know, and it was such a great way of getting people onto, you know, the American and British side by giving them candy, by giving them
mm.
things that they hadn't had access to in such a long time. Um, was there anything that just really broke your heart when you were researching the Blitz? Because
It's
it is
always, yeah. I mean, you know, there was so much tragedy throughout, and it's attacks on civilians. You know, it's schools getting struck by bombs. It's people, you know, losing their, you know, accepting a marriage proposal and then getting in a few weeks word that they've, you know, that the fiance has died, kind of thing. Constant losses. But for me, it's always the acts of kindness that get me the most emotional when I read about them or hear about them. You know, reading about a guy who goes AWOL from the army and, you know, goes home and the police come around and they're, you know, and then a neighbor says, look, he can't do it. You've got to be forgive. You've got to understand. You've got to take, you know, you got to cut him some slack, and they do. You know, it's stuff like that. It's when people are kind. The idea of the children being taken in from, you know, the evacuees or the refugees from Europe, you know, taken into households. Not all of it was a happy story. You know, they didn't always go to great homes. But when you see some people becoming parts of the family, you see, I read, oh, it's great, this, uh, horrible little girl from, some dire urban place comes, and head lice and whatever, and then her mother comes to visit her, and they're staying in some relatively aristocratic home, and the lady's like, no, you must consider this your home, here, use this, and she comes in and they're sleeping on the floor. She's like, no, use the bed, it's fine. It's always the kindness and the understanding that really gets me the most cut up and the most distraught, and maybe a manly tear or two, because people are good. It makes me, yeah, that's the part that really gets me going.
Exactly. Knowing that despite all the awfulness and we could be awful to each other, that when we do those acts of kindness and acts of good, and that's one of the things that I really like about your characters, Daniel, is that even though they may suffer, they may have some bad things happen to them, ultimately your good characters are good. You don't have to worry about them going to the dark side.
Yeah, that's not how I roll for these guys. Although I love a good villain, there's nothing more fun than writing a villain. They're always so much more, you're like, okay, this is gonna be great, but yeah, I can't do it for the mains. And I like the man. I don't think they come across as bland, hopefully not, but
No, they
certainly,
don't. Absolutely not.
and they're
Um,
tempted, but
oh, 100%. I mean, you know, Pam does what she does in the beginning chapters of the book because she's
mm,
just royally ticked off.
because
I mean,
yeah,
you're tired of dealing with it. Anybody's going to snap in that sort of situation. And I think
well,
if you
yeah.
had the powers that Pam did, I would think that, gosh, why wouldn't you? Why
Yeah,
wouldn't
knowing that you can make the difference, but you're not allowed to. And it's something I explore. I don't know if you've read the scene. There's a scene where they meet with Winston Churchill, which was super fun to. I don't know if you've read it. It's genius, no. But it was super fun to write, and it really, I tried to explore the questions there very much. Is the war is happening. Why are you not doing more when you could? When you could so easily stop it. Well, yeah,
you?
it's kind of
Exactly.
an interesting thing. Yeah.
And you wonder, I mean, how much would have, but you would have changed the entire history of your present day if that had
Yeah.
happened. And
Yeah.
that would have been a challenge. That would have been writing yourself into a well, I think.
Absolutely. We mentioned the Flashman books, George MacDonald Fraser. Did you ever read his autobiography, Quartered Safe Out Here?
No, I
Uh,
haven't. Although
it's
I know Barbara and a few of our other staff members have.
it's very good. I mean, he was a soldier in Burma and stuff, and his perspectives are, he's an educated person of his time, and his musings later on various elements of war are very thought provoking. There's it's a good read. I recommend it.
What do you think is the most important part of science fiction and fantasy? I often say that it's, you know, uh, good usually overcoming evil.
Mm,
Although, I think that a lot of science fiction fantasy has changed over the years. I mean, we've got our grim darks in which we explore, human motivation.
mhm.
And I think that that's one thing that fantasy and science fiction does really well. What do you think is so important with that genre, with this genre? Why do we tell stories in that vein?
Yeah, I think especially for science fiction, it's a chance for us to think about how technology changes us
Yeah,
and how it doesn't change us. And discovery changes us and doesn't change us. It sort of almost lays the groundwork in some ways. I think we're probably better equipped for the idea of aliens arriving than our forebears would have been in that regard, because we've had a chance to think about it. It's the tastemaker, and I know that it's not supposed to necessarily predict the future, because you're always going to get the details wrong. But I think it lets us think more effectively about how things could be and how things are. Um, it always encourages us to look at what we have now as much as what might happen in the future. One of my favorite science fiction writers is Peter F. Hamilton. Do you know Peter F. Hamilton's
very
stuff?
much so. Yeah.
Yeah, genius stuff. I mean, just massive tomes. Thank God, because I love them. But he looks very effectively at, okay, if we have constant, if you have the chance at everyone having immortality and expansion in the Commonwealth saga, uh, is it just going to be life is a constant slog kind of thing? You know, that's one of the elements that really resounded with me. I mean, and the alien invasion, of course, was very important as well. But exploring how we want to live our lives, really, you know, it's not too big a question to ponder just from reading a science fiction thing. It's important in that regard. And also, I think it really inspires people in all sorts of ways to how they're going to, what they want to do, how they want to live their lives.
I think one of the things that, you know, I've really enjoyed about the Rook series, or the Check series, and with the Blitz is really your analysis of kind of the human condition in terms of, you know, even if we were given these powers, would we actually use them for good or for ill? And I think that
Mm.
one of the things that ultimately what you say throughout the books is humanity is pretty good. We would do it for good rather than, you know, there might be a few bad apples, but for the most part, even if we were powered, so to speak,
Yeah.
we would do something more for the good of humanity. And I think that that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your books is that you get to use that to kind of um, explore that.
Thank you. I it's and in Blitz, you see people with powers who don't use them for good, you know, who use them for profit and power and stuff. And I think, and I believe such a thing would have a corrosive effect on a person. And I've tried to explore that somewhat in that, insofar as, you know, if you really believe yourself above and better than those around you, it makes you a worse person inevitably, not just morally, but in terms of, you know, the way you interact and react with people. You know, you can see it in the cases of some celebrities or people with, you know, significant power. They treat others less, and it is not good.
Yes,
Not all
it,
celebrities by any means, and not all people with authority or power, but it does have that effect on some people. You know,
it does.
you can look at a dictator, you can look at an entitled person and see that that's how they treat, you know, without it.
Well,
Yeah.
and you can, you know, you can explore, you know, how we've treated people throughout history, you know, and oftentimes those groups in power, you know, if they take over a group, tend to kind of walk over the common people.
Yeah.
Uh, and but I think that that's one of the fun things about it. But the other thing that I really enjoy and I appreciate about your books is that you're not afraid to make them entertaining, but you're also write a really darn good mystery. And for a mystery bookstore like ours, um, that's really cool because not only can I introduce staunch science fiction fantasy readers to your books, but I can try to encourage mystery readers
Oh,
to cross genre, so to speak.
thank you. That's really encouraging to hear. You know, I mean, the Rook was very much a, here are your 10 or however many it was possible, you know, suspects kind of thing. For others, sometimes it's a case of, you know, we're going to track it down. It's a person you've never met, but here's why. It's the clue, and I always enjoy both. Frankly, you know, you sort of, there's always the temptation to say, oh well, you know, I better throw this person in as having been around before. You don't have to. You can show how, like most crimes, it's, you know, it'll be somebody you never encountered previously, and then you're like, okay, it's probably this person. One of the best parts of doing the research for this and the next thing I'm working on is a good friend of mine. I didn't know she had been a homicide detective, and I'm like, really? I need to ask you a lot of questions. And she's like, fine, you know, like she doesn't do it now. But she also gave me some good information on how to use a baton, you know, the extendable telescoping batons. I was also like, so you had one of those as a cop? And she's like, I did. And I'm like, tell me. And she's like, heavy and this. And I'm like, oh, great, fascinating stuff. So very good research friend to have. And also just a good, you know, good friend. But that,
Exactly. So now you're pretty good with Batten, right?
yeah. I feel like I could write an effective scene. I'm sure if actually confronted with a fight, I'd be like, oh, I give up. I can't wail on you with this. But yeah. So
So the elephant in the room, what was it like writing for or selling your book
yeah,
Hollywood
yeah,
and seeing
absolutely.
it translated into the big screen?
it was, well, multiple screens. It was a fascinating experience. I was at the time working on a very interesting and absorbing project for the government, which I was working on with my organization was doing the search for that missing Malaysian aircraft, MH370. And I was really focused and dedicated on that. And so I had very little to do with the TV show at all. I was sort of, no, you go ahead. I don't know how to write a TV show. I have these other things I'm working on. But I, thought, go forth. I'll be very supportive of that, because I had decided early on, if this were, you always have your sort of like, oh, if this gets made into a movie, if this goes this will be amazing. I'll play the guy who has a condor on his head. I wrote that part for myself. No lines, but the big bird. And I had sort of said, what, let them do as they want. If they have good ideas, let them explore them. If they have good opportunities, if they have a great actor, if they have a great thing, don't say it must be a slavish reproduction of the book, because the book exists, and I don't think anybody becomes a writer, television or otherwise, with the idea that I'm just gonna slavishly follow this. I want to have my own ideas. And so I said, go ahead and go nuts. And they came up with some very, very cool concepts. And the TV show is different from the book. It's different a lot in tone, and then characters change, and portrayals are not as how I had always thought of them, but some are bang on, and they took ideas and expanded on them very engagingly. I got to go and do a cameo, which was great. That was the only thing I insisted on. I was like, anything else is fine, but I want that cameo. And they had me over I went over to London, and I stand in a crowd, and look at that. The main actress who's playing Miffany comes in wearing a very startling gown dress to the party, and I do this. That's my reaction shot. That was the extent of the role, but it was a great experience to go see it being done. At one point, the Gestalt characters, for those of you who haven't read the books, Gestalt is a hive mind. It's 4 siblings who share a single brain, not brain, but mind. It's not a case of reading each other's thoughts. It's one entity with 4 bodies. And at one point they walk down the hallway towards me in unison. And I was just like, oh, this is really freaking me out. That was a very vivid experience to have. And seeing interpretations of characters was great. So that from now on, whenever I write a certain character, Linda Ferrier, I do it with Jolie Richardson in mind, because she pulled that character off with incredible elan, and I just sort of, when I first met her, I wanted to do a little bow. I'm like, I probably shouldn't do that, but it was instinct. She brought so much authority to the role, and there were so many great actors, and everybody was so welcoming. It was almost like it was being done for my entertainment value. People were like, I got to watch a story of the Rook where I didn't know what was going to happen, and when things, I was like, oh, okay, I can't take anything for granted. So it's great if other people, you'll get a kick out of it, but I'm getting a real kick out of it because I don't know what the hell is going on.
But you don't write now for Hollywood in mind. You write really just for your own tastes, right?
My own entertainment, and if others happen to enjoy it, which so far they seem to have done, that's great, and especially now that I'm doing it full time, I'm like that I hope that will continue to be the case. But
I think so. I think The Blitz is such a brilliant book, and in terms of I hope everybody goes out and it becomes a massive long-term success, because it was such a great read. And like I said, 700 pages that doesn't feel like 700 pages, and you want to continue on. Can you give us a little bit of a hint of what you're working on right now?
I have a few different projects. So I really want to write. I'm working on certainly another one in this universe, in this government department. But it's not going to be 2 different timelines. That nearly killed me. And new character. I like to have the old characters, stop in, but I think it's useful to have different perspectives. I'm not going to give me. It's another mystery sort of thing. But then I'm also working on a couple of, there's a small dog behind you, or maybe it's a large dog, but
no, this is Paul.
Paul.
He comes with me to the store. He's 12 years old. Hold on just a second.
Bud. Oh, hi.
There we go. There's
Hey.
Paul.
Oh
Little
man, my
rustling
great
up
dog.
there.
Mine is out lying in the sun. My Sally O'Malley is lying out in the sun. I'm like, Sally, and she's like, no, I'm not coming to you. What a nice looking dog. And he
He
comes to with
likes
you to the
to,
store, you said?
yes. So if people ever want to meet Paul, Paul's always with me.
That's
Paul,
justifying my trip. Shoot, man.
oh yeah, yeah. He's a very good boy, aren't you? You're a
We
good.
love you. Dog arm. Yeah.
Buy, buy
Sorry, viewers,
Blitz.
but
Give Paul sausages.
oh, really? That's great. Sally likes cheese. She likes Baby Bell cheese. That's nice, and it's great. You can take him to the store. That's really cool. Yeah.
He's older. He's 12 years old. He's got a heart condition, which is why you hear him cough from time to time, and he takes a little bit of medicine. And I'm his emotional support human. So
Nice.
yeah, yeah, he doesn't like to be left home alone, and frankly, I don't blame him. He
Yeah.
would want to. It's less interesting.
Well, I mean, you assume he just like gets online and gets into flame wars. Probably works on his novel.
He does, yeah. We don't want that. I don't want him out shining me.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is a weird manifesto.
This really is.
He's very strong opinions on the free market.
Away, right?
Nice.
Patrick, do you happen to be online? Yes, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Do we have any Q&A?
Yeah, what a great conversation, I should just say. I've really been enjoying it myself. Yeah, somebody's watching on YouTube would like to know, are we going to learn more about is it the Croatoan? Is that the American
Yeah.
version in upcoming books?
Yes, probably not the next one, although I do have an American character in there. But yeah, I definitely want to explore it. So much of the Sheke draws on British public service tradition or civil service tradition. I don't know if either of the Pats who are watching watched Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister.
Yes.
Okay, good. You can stay. But I was always very interested in that. So I think I would probably have to draw more on like, gosh, what are the American equivalents? Maybe West Wing to a certain extent. I'd like to learn more about the British or the American government system. And I have a bunch of friends in American government, so I probably have to interrogate them a goodly amount. But also there's such a big tradition of, sci-fi fantasy, weird urban fantasy and stuff that I'd like to like nod my head to and explore the country more. I miss America very much, and I miss Americans a lot. So I'm keen for any justification for a research trip. I like living in America very much. I miss it a lot. So yes, absolutely, Croatoan would be, and I could probably figure out how to pronounce the name correctly. It's one of those ones where I've seen it written down. Like I assume it's Croatoan.
I think.
We'll go with that. But I can always like justify, it's like, oh no, it's in the books, it's pronounced this way. So the main character of the Rook, Miffany, to rhyme with Tiffany, it's a Welsh name, and that's how the girl I used to babysit would say it. And then some Welsh people are like, it's actually Myfanwy. And I'm like, not in this, it isn't. I'm sorry, she's going to mispronounce her own name. I'm fine with that, So yeah, definitely more Americans in the future. I want to explore it, but I also want to explore other countries. And that was one of the fun things about Blitz is I have a different period, but B, I talk a bit about supernatural stuff throughout the British Empire. And one of the best books that I enjoy researching from is a thing called Plain Tales from the Empire. And if any of you, it's a write-up of radio interviews that the BBC did with people who lived in the British Raj, who lived in Africa when it was, during the protectorates, and Singapore and the South China Seas in the lead up to World War II. Very, very interesting. And once again, those good personal experiences with details. You're like, okay, I'm gonna steal the fact that you use this kind of armchair, or that you shouldn't go hunting pigs by yourself with a spear, those sort of things. It's a great book, Plain Tales from the Empire. I recommend it heartily.
Wow. Did you happen to see the Peter Jackson documentary about World War One? Wasn't that phenomenal?
It was amazing. And looking at these, the color really does make a difference in the speeding up. We always sort of think, or I always think, oh yeah, World War One, they all talked like this and moved like this.
Right.
That's just the video. It was great. And bad teeth. Everyone was dirty. Once again, everyone was dirty. And yeah, really adds a zing to it.
And that the narration was solely comprised of recorded testimony from World War One veterans. That was incredible. I guess the BBC has a vast archive of that kind of thing. One of the things that struck me, and then we'll take this in for a landing, in such a divisive time that we're in now, reading about going and looking at the Blitz, You get this idea of, people coming together against a common peril.
Yeah.
I remember being struck by that, and when I was in London, just kind of reading some of the memorial stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a story, I hope it's true, is that when Ronald Reagan met with the Russian premier of the time, who was the premier of the time? I forget which one.
Gorbachev?
I think it was Gorbachev, when they were meeting, and I've read that, Reagan said, if aliens invaded, would you help us? And Gorbachev was like, yes. And Reagan was like, yeah, we'd help you. It was that, and this is Cold War. That's the kind of thing where I'm like, oh, we have hope as a
That
species.
seems quaint now, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Gosh.
but I like to think that we'd still step in,
Yeah, absolutely.
Never
Let's see, a couple more questions are coming in. Okay, Mariah would like to know, while writing this book, did you prefer writing the scenes during the Blitz or in the present?
I always find whatever I'm not writing. Let me put this. No. So I also I'm working on some historical fiction as well. Whenever I'm writing supernatural stuff, I'm always like, oh, you know what? It's so much historical fiction, so much easier. I just have to I don't have to make anything up. All the details are there. But then when I'm writing historical fiction, I'm like, this is so unfair. I can just do whatever I want with supernatural. So the grass is always greener. Whenever I was writing the World War II stuff, I'd be like, oh, I've got to figure out, I better look up, how much water they were allowed in their bathtub. In the modern day stuff, it's just easy. And then in the modern day stuff, I'm like, God, I don't even have to worry about things like, phones and phone tracking and stuff in the World War II part. I can't wait to get to the next. So it's always whatever I'm working on is the hardest, and I'm a saint for doing it, kind of thing.
Let's see, one other quick question here. What inspiration do you draw on for the idiosyncratic powers?
Oh God, it just just weird, whatever weird circumstances. Generally, I get my best ideas when I'm bored, when I'm in a situation where I can't read or watch anything, I can't entertain myself. So, waiting in a line, like at the Subway sandwich shop, in the shower, either that or if somebody's really irritating me, I'm always looking for a good, weird, supernatural way for them to die. Which makes me sound terrible, but it's the truth nonetheless. Loud typing guy in the library. Oh man, the things that I've imagined happening to him. It's very loud. Actually, he hasn't been there a while. Hopefully he's okay and was not, trampled by a walrus or whatever I was imagining for him. Yeah. So it's that. It's not. Some powers. I always like to think about the weird applications for powers. Like, okay, yes, there's a character who can control cloth, can control textiles, and I thought, okay, let's see where I can go with this. And I went to I was like, oh my God, even I'm sort of startled at what, this is quite a frightening power. He can do some very alarming things. And I named that character after the wardrobe master from the Rook miniseries, actually. He was very helpful, the guy. And I was like, would you like to, I'm going to name a character after you. Do you want to be a villain or do you want to be a hero? And he's like, oh, I'll go the villain. I'm like, fantastic. All right. You're like crap some people with their own pants.
Has there been a graphic novel adaptation of any of your work?
Not yet. I'd be fascinated to see how it works, though. And I'd like to try my hand at writing comics. I think that I've always been a huge, graphic novel comic fan. I enjoy Ben Aronovich's work very much. He writes the Rivers of London series. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, but then he has he writes the comics as well that sort of take place in between the books, which I've always been like, that's a cool idea. I wouldn't mind trying my hand.
Those have made it to print in the US.
Really?
Usually import his books about a year ahead of time.
Oh,
because they're always out ahead of the American release, usually by about a year.
Okay.
From England. So, and that's such a phenomenal series. Yeah, The Rivers of London. I'm trying to think of the title. The American title is different from the Australian.
Yeah, Midnight Riot. I think it was.
Midnight Riot. Yeah.
I wanted to send it to a friend. I was like, I can't find it on Amazon. What the heck? I'm like, oh wait, yeah. I think they switched over. Yeah, titles are always iffy, I guess. I'm always amused by the changes they might need to make for Americans or Australians or whatever. I always think that's kind of interesting.
So I've got a personal question for you, Daniel. Violet Crumbles, fan?
Yes. Sorry?
Fan or not?
I enjoy, but I don't come across. I don't eat too many of them. This is for those of you who aren't aware. Violet Crumble is a candy bar. It's a crystallized sugar honeycomb thing in the middle. Certain and chocolate. I enjoyed, but only in the small ones. The large ones too much because they get really into your teeth. And mildly interesting fact, which you'll have to endure, they can't cut them with blades or they shatter, so they have to use jets of high stream oil to cut through the honeycomb. That's kind of cool.
That's really cool. Solari brought someone as a writer in residence, and I never had it before. And I've got to say, that stuff is like crack.
Oh, you enjoyed it. Okay, I was brave for you to be like, this is the devil's,
Is that the one that kind of shatters when you bite into it?
Yeah, but then sort of melts in your mouth as you chew on it. I've never had anything like it, and it's
okay, I'll make a note. If ever I'm there, I'll make sure I pack some. Generally, the Australian foods I bring as currency are Tim Tams. Are you familiar with Tim Tams? The Australian.
Yep.
You do the Tim Tam slam where you suck it, the coffee or the whatever through the cookie.
No, I've never done the Tim Tam.
Oh, you bite the either end off and then you plunge it into the coffee or the Baileys or whatever, and you got to suck real hard to get the stuff up through, and then anyway, it's very pleasant. So Tim Tams and Minties are sort of a mint toffee that'll shut you up for a good long time, that kind of thing. That's currency from Australia for me.
No Vegemite.
Dude, I took Vegemite to university, and I could empty the Michigan State, the Abbott Hall dining cafeteria by opening the Vegemite to make toast. All the Americans were like recoiling. I'm like, you don't want to try? They looked like they were ready to kill themselves. Yeah.
We all have our odd foods, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned George MacDonald Fraser. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
Of his books. What was the name of the memoir, though? I don't think I've read it.
Quartered Safe Out Here.
Quartered Safe Out Here.
Quartered Safe Out Here. And also there's a book of his essays and articles sort of commenting on the modern world as somebody who, a guy from the 40s or whatever. And it's called Lights On at Signpost, I think, or Lights On at Lamppost, something along those lines. Wow. And he talks about various things, including his experiences like writing for Hollywood. Like he wrote Octopussy. And
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I think he had a first bash at Superman and stuff. He wrote a Three Musketeers movie that did very well in the 70s, and the sequel. And then the sequel.
A new adaptation of Flashman would be great. If they did it well,
I mean, Flashman himself is such a, has such horrendous opinions on so many things. I think at the moment, it would prompt a lot of responses. He despises everybody for whatever, for everything. So but I enjoyed the books immensely.
Well, just the idea of, this kind of coward rake
coward bully,
loses and whores his way through decisive moments and European history. He's like the last guy that survives the Battle of Little Bighorn in one book. And
the great tragedy is we never got the Civil War one where he's decorated by both sides.
Oh, that's right.
Kills me.
Flashman Among the Redskins, wasn't that the title of one of them? Yeah.
I think that's my dad's favorite.
They could get canceled very easily.
They're not PC for our era.
They definitely are not.
But on the other hand, the guy grew up and the guy fought in World War II. I mean, he was a creature of a different age. But I don't know if you know the story that when the first one came out, various academic journals thought it was real.
Really?
Yes, it's an important new work of new insights into the Victorian experience. They were like, it's a novel. It's based on Tom Brown's school days. Yeah, love it. Do we have any other questions from society? If not, it's fine. I mean, you and I can shoot the shit with you guys for eons anyway.
Well, maybe one last one. Can you talk a little bit more about the political neutrality of your group?
Somewhat, yes, I can. Which is to say that, like most civil servants and public servants, they are very apolitical. They have to be apolitical professionally in any case. They're allowed to have their own opinions. There's a phrase from, I think it's from the Australian public service experience, which is frank and fearless, which means that when you are reporting news to, your political people or whatever, you have to give the facts. You have to not sugarcoat it, and don't bring a bias to it. And I think that really that applies to most government workers in all situations. And certainly even for the supernatural ones, it's very much the case of we are here to serve and do our jobs. But it helps also that my characters, they are in many ways separate from society. I've tried to make it clear that they occupy a strange legal situation. They can't vote, they can't travel overseas because they're weapons of mass destruction, and their presence has significant implications, even if it's secret. And the whole idea of having this agency, this force that exists only to allow human society to proceed without interference from the supernatural or the inexplicable. And it's something I'm always sort of exploring a little bit more and more, insofar as, people, why do you have to keep it secret? And I like the idea of it being, because if people knew, for the most part, they would respond very, very badly. That was a thing I explore. Lynette, the character, goes from you see her going from having her normal civilian life to being exposed to all these things, and saying it's appalling that you would take children from their families, and like, well, we have to for these reasons. And as a mother, she reacts very strongly to that. And as a person who has also had bad experiences with, the system. But I hope I explore it or explain it, or at least see why they think it's the case, even if you don't agree or Lynn doesn't agree in that score. But yeah, not there to serve any particular political view, but rather just to do the job, and do the job as directed. And that's the terrible responsibility of the people who are giving the orders. Is you'll be. I think that I forget where I read it. Somebody described, it's not the job of the sergeant to question the orders, it's just to carry them out. And somebody says, I've seen, commanding officers reduced to nervous wrecks because the sergeant just continuously agrees to do whatever. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'm not going to give you any feedback, but I'll carry out your orders. I thought that was a very strong idea. I like that a lot. Yeah.
So your characters are forced to make some very tough choices.
Yeah, but also, it's as much forcing themselves not to act when they want to, when they could. And that's the instigating thing of Blitz. Is the first part is, why have you done this? It's forbidden from doing it. And that's a thing. Nominally, these are set in our world, although, there's significant changes. But how can things remain secret if people are if the Sheke and their like are not keeping a low profile? They have to let history sort of go on. Yeah.
Well, PK, you want to take us out?
Absolutely. Daniel, when people are interested in, after they watch this, they want to get more Daniel O'Malley, where can they find you?
Well, so the first two books, as I mentioned, are available at all good bookstores, particularly the Poison Pen Press. Bless your boots. And I'll continue to work and produce more as swiftly and as I can without compromising, the quality, and also, my own inherent laziness on that score. The TV show, the miniseries, which is different but is very good and is something of the same, is available on some streaming service in the States. I believe it's on Stan.
I believe Stars. Stars was
it? Stars? It's Stars. Yeah, I knew it was another SP.
Correct us if we're wrong.
I believe that's good. They certainly made it. Who knows what the situation is now? And there are other books we've talked about a bunch that I enjoyed. If you want more information on World War II, day-to-day life experience, How We Lived Then by Norman Longmate's terrific. TV show I love is Foyle's War. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's murder mystery set in, by Anthony Horowitz, who is also a writer, a novelist. Stuff. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff. There's great stuff out in the world. I forgot the question and I have no answer.
No problem. Are you on Twitter or Facebook?
Oh, yes. Good thinking. Yes, of course. Yes, I am on Twitter with the least well thought out Twitter handle. You could probably just do Daniel O'Malley, because my Twitter thing is Denim Alley. And this is a result of, I would answer the phone at government, be like, hi, ATSB, Dan O'Malley speaking. And they'd be like, hi, Denim. I'm like, no, my name is not Denim Alley. That's not a name. I'm Dan. Anyway, so I thought this will be hilarious. It's never served me well as a Twitter thing since. I'm on the Instagram, usually with pictures of either my dog or cake or interesting flavored milks, but occasionally book stuff as well. And I maintain a Facebook presence. So seek me out. I have a website, www.rookfiles.com, that just got a facelift. And I blog, every once in a while. It's probably time for another blog entry.
Do people blog anymore as much?
God, I hope not. I hope that justifies me not doing it. My last blog actually was about visiting Solari Gentle in Batlow as part of a writing event. We wrote short stories for trees to commemorate because they said they had the big bushfires. And one of the things that survived was this century-old arboretum, bewildering and gladly, but fires all around, but these trees survived. And we each got a tree to write a story for. And I got the redwood, and I wrote a good, scary Sheke-esque style story that is actually feeding into the book I'm working on at the moment. So
Nice.
yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Daniel, thank you so much for spending.
Thank you for having me. This is terrific. I will be descending upon you guys as soon as I can get across the Pacific and whatever amount of land there is between that and your place.
Barbara should be around there sometime next year. So we'll have to kidnap you, take you across into the state.
Brilliant. Yeah, Solari and I both we'll make sure she eats ridiculous food and sees the most ridiculous parts of the region. Terrific.
Absolutely. Daniel, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Patrick, thank you for setting up all the tech and making this happen.
You bet.
Brilliant. Bye, Craig.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Craig, thank you so much.
Was Craig the dog?
Paul.
I think it's like some name.
Human name, yeah. Patrick's Paul. Yeah. Try to keep it with the P's.
We love you. You're such a good dog. Okay, sorry.
Yes, he's like, I want to go for a walk, Dad.
Fair enough too. Thanks again, guys. This is
really
good
night. All right. Take care.
Bye.